Good afternoon, everybody. Jeremy Benamy, president of J Street in Washington, D.C., and I'm here with you today for a really important discussion about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We are all following this in excruciating detail. I've just gotten back from a trip to the region where it took a group of former American policymakers to the Gaza border and all over the West Bank, Israel, trying to get a better handle on the facts on the ground. And one of the people that we meet with on every single trip, maybe much to her chagrin, because we run her into the ground, is joining us today for this discussion, Tanya Harry, who is the director of Gisha. I want to make sure that everybody knows that in this webinar format, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and you can put questions in that I'll be trying to dig into over the course of our panel. We're going to have a back-to-back discussions, first with Tanya from Gisha, and then at about the half-hour mark, we'll be switching over to Tony Aguilar, formerly working with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, now essentially a public whistleblower about some of the problems with the GHF and with the mechanisms in which aid is being distributed in the new format. And so we'll be talking to Tony after we're finished talking to Tanya. Please feel free to put questions in the Q&A. The conversation is going to be recorded. It'll be available to rewatch and share on J Street's YouTube channel. And Eliza is going to share the link for that in the chat. So thank you for everybody for joining us. I know that we are all Tanya, just so deeply, deeply distressed watching from the United States and watching from abroad. You're, of course, firsthand, you've had staff in Gaza, you deal with people in Gaza all of the time, this starvation, the suffering, the deprivation. This is something that moves all of us, whatever the words are that people are using to describe the situation. And we've had whole seminars and webinars about debating exactly what to call it. This is simply morally wrong. And the deprivation of a civilian population of the basic necessities of life in the course of a war is something that we believe is counter to international law, but also most importantly counter to our Jewish morals, which is why J Street is hosting this call. We want to really try to bring this situation to as much public awareness as possible, dig through all the various narratives to try to get to the facts of what is actually happening on the ground. And I really appreciate you being here. And I have to say, for those who don't know Gisha, perhaps you could describe a little bit the history of Gisha and then go into a little bit of a sort of state of the moment. Where are we today in terms of the amount of aid that's getting in and out? So Tanya Harry from Gisha, thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate J Street hosting this event at this particular moment, because I think we're starting to see a few changes in policy, and I think that the tendency is for people to look away, for people to think, okay, something has changed now, aid is going in, we don't have to worry about the situation. So I think it's really critical that we're having this conversation today. So Gisha means access or approach for those who don't speak Hebrew. And yeah, we're an Israeli organization. We've been around now 20 years. We're marking 20 years of operations this year. And we've been actually following the situation in Gaza very, very closely that whole time. Our mandate is actually focused on the Gaza Strip and on the issue of movement and access, because that's the main way that Israel still has control and influence over civilians' lives, even in the wake of the disengagement, which of course happened in 2005, the year of our founding. So we've been watching the situation, and we're experts on access policy, and that really has continued since October 7th. We're monitoring very closely exactly what the policy is, what's going in and out, what's allowed, not allowed. And we're also a legal organization, so we're helping individuals to navigate what was before the permit regime and is now, whatever policy there is on evacuations or on re-entry to Gaza. And we're also doing legal and public advocacy more broadly on access policy writ large. So that's Gisha in a nutshell, and definitely invite people to check us out, gisha.org, and all the social media platforms one can think of. In terms of the situation right now, so like I said, we're seeing some changes in policy. Right at the end of July, Israel announced that it would be introducing a few new measures to alleviate or ostensibly alleviate the crisis. And this followed, of course, a total blockade on aid entry from March 2nd to May 19th, the creation of the GHF, which we'll hear about, and an allotment for some organizations to operate, which really wasn't going far enough. None of these things were going far enough really to address this massive humanitarian catastrophe that we all saw unfolding in recent months and weeks. These measures that have been introduced, and we can get into them more, things like, for example, allowing tactical pauses so that humanitarian convoys can enter, re-allowing airdrops of aid, allowing the private sector to bring in commercial goods. All of these actions in and of themselves are, of course, welcome, but I'm afraid they're not being implemented enough to really tackle the problem. And what Gisha and others, of course, are saying is that really without a ceasefire, without really a surge of aid from all crossing points, we're not going to see the situation, be addressed kind of at the root of it.
And just for folks' knowledge, J Street's position on this, of course, is that the time has come to end the war, free the hostages, and surge aid. We have an ongoing campaign and an initiative to get people to sign on, to call on leaders of the Jewish community in this country to speak out on these issues. And I'm sure we're going to be able to put a link in the chat for people who want to join us in that effort. Tanya, the Gaza Strip is a small geographic area. I always struggle to find the best comparison. Yesterday, I heard that it's the size of metropolitan Detroit. So that was my latest, to give people a flavor of just how small this area is. How much aid used to get in? What was sort of the standard that we can get our heads around? How many trucks, how much tonnage, what used to get in, and what were the ways that food and other supplies got in prior to this round of the Gaza fighting?
Yeah. So, before the war, most of what was coming into Gaza was actually coming in for the private sector. You did, of course, have a majority of the population dependent on humanitarian aid because of years of closure and restrictions on the economy, of the various kind of restraints on the economy developing. But the international organizations would actually purchase the goods that were coming in from the private sector for the most part. And some organizations were also bringing in their own, trucks of goods. But what we were seeing right before the war was somewhere around 500 trucks a day. And, we're reticent to sort of count truckloads because, of course, it's really difficult to say, to kind of count what people need in that kind of measurement. If you have just 500 trucks of flour, that is not, of course, going to address people's needs. But, you would have had a combination of food items, construction materials, inputs for industry. And of course, since the war began, or I should say, right after the horrific attacks of October 7th, this decision was taken immediately to, not open the borders of Gaza, to not allow aid or any goods to enter. Of course, also to shut down the electricity supply, the water supply, no entry of fuel either, which usually compensates for lack of electricity, to run generators. And so, right away, you basically had the Strip, surviving only on what was already inside. And as the war progressed, of course, we saw massive destruction, massive displacement, virtually an elimination of all local forms of food production, so agriculture, fishing, manufacturing, and this only then increased dependence on aid. So it also makes the counting truckloads a bit difficult because you can't really compare what was happening before to what is happening now. If people can't cultivate their fields, if fishermen can't get out to fish, if the local companies that were operating to make some food in Gaza can't operate, then of course you're going to need even more truckloads of aid to be coming in. And so, throughout the war, we've seen various sort of changes in policy. But for the most part, and from our perspective, there's never really been a concrete decision to reverse that initial choice of using aid access as a weapon of this war, using deprivation as a form of pressure, as a form of punishment in many cases, trying also to use aid to get people to move to different parts of the strip. So it's not even just that we can count what is going in. We also need to ask ourselves, what is allowed to come in? Where is it allowed to go? Who can distribute it? Is that distribution effective? Only by really, I think, getting at the nuance of the situation can we really understand the magnitude of this catastrophe. Because one of the things that we're seeing right now is that despite these recent changes in policy I mentioned, some aid trucks are getting in, but they're not getting to the people who need the aid, right? They're being looted, they're being self-distributed, they're being taken over by people, armed gangs and things, and then resold in the market. So you have this real situation of desperation and chaos that's been created from this deprivation that is then also affecting the ability of the aid to get around and get where it needs to go.
And prior to the March cutoff,
Yeah.
most of this was being managed through the UN, through UNRWA, through various international NGOs that had an ecosystem that understood how to get the goods in and then how to distribute.
Yes,
For hundreds of distribution sites, right? And,
exactly.
and I guess that was just effectively ended, right? I mean, that whole system was brought to an end. And then when the border was reopened, was that May, I think, sometime in mid-May.
Yes.
That whole system that had been in place for not only the years of the war, but prior, that was no longer in use. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I do think, one measure that could be a bit more helpful is the presence of these community kitchens that are operating. Of course, we think people should be able to, cook in their own homes and have access to food. But, the community kitchens have been an important source of food for the majority of the population. And for example, during this period of the ceasefire, where we saw the most goods coming in since October of 2023, there were about 400 of these community kitchens or distribution points that were active. After the March total blockade, week by week, we saw these kitchens just shutting down one after another because they just didn't have the goods coming in to be able to operate. And Israel then created the GHF and talked about the GHF replacing this whole UN-led but it's UN led, but it's run by a number of INGOs and also local organizations, Palestinian organizations that partner with these INGOs and with the UN to provide, food for the community. And so, Israel created the GHF and started opening these distribution sites. And of course, at the moment, there are only 4 distribution sites. So this concept of 4 distribution sites replacing these 400 distribution sites is completely ridiculous. And also the distribution sites are all located south of Wadi Gaza. So 3 of them in the very far south and 1 in the central Gaza Strip. It means the whole north of the Strip is not even accessing these GHF sites. And to give a sense of where things are today, the UN just announced today that 81 of these community kitchens are now operating. So just in the last few weeks, as more goods are coming in and the kitchens are able to restock some of their supplies, we're seeing some of them reopen, which is positive. But again, 81 compared to 400 is really nothing. So we really need to, from my perspective, keep the attention up and the pressure up, so that, aid continues to flow in, increases, and that, people can get what they need.
And what is your on the ground feel for the role that Hamas and other criminal and armed elements play in the deflection of aid from where it's supposed to get? What role is that? Is, of course, the rationale that Netanyahu and the IDF say for having shifted the mechanism, setting up the GHF, changing the rules of the game. They felt that the aid was being taken by Hamas for its own purposes, and they were feeding themselves, and they were then creating a black market that would provide them with funds. What's your perspective on those charges?
Yeah. I would say I would take those kinds of claims with a really huge grain of salt. I mean, I think that we need to kind of look at exactly what's been said by Israeli officials from the start of the war and, through to today. The diversion issue, I like to think, is kind of brought to people who are kind of polite company, who are concerned about the situation, who want to see civilians, not starving. And so the diversion argument is brought in, I think, as a kind of distraction from the policy, which, like I said, from the very beginning has been one of using aid as a form of pressure, a form of displacement. So I think that that's always there. And even recently with the new measures that were introduced, Israeli officials are telling the public here, we have to do this in order to deflect criticism so we can keep the war going. So it doesn't reflect a change of heart. It doesn't reflect a change in the diversion issue. From my perspective, it's, just to kind of keep, to be able to keep the war going. That's not to say that diversion hasn't occurred or it doesn't occur in wartime. I mean, this is a classic kind of problem and feature of wars everywhere. But I don't see evidence. And of course, we've heard, USAID, David Satterfield, the former envoy from, the Biden administration. These kind of sources also did not see kind of widespread or systematic diversion of aid by Hamas. And organizations, on the ground, organizations that we've worked with for years and that we trust, say the same thing. The real problem is just simply that not enough has got in, and it's not, safe enough to distribute it inside of Gaza to the people who need it.
So we've had a few really good questions in the chat, and I want to raise them to you. Some are legal, some are political, some are just personal reflections. So on the legal front, what is the you are a legal organization, and that's the whole purpose of Gisha. What is the obligation under international law of the state of Israel in the posture that it's in, right? They are considered still to be the occupying force of this territory. And so what's their legal obligation to the civilian population that lives there in the time of conflict and war?
Yeah. So to try to simplify things, Israel has obligations as an occupying power. Our position is that Gaza is occupied. It's a position that was, reaffirmed by the International Court of Justice. It's the official position still held by the UN, the ICRC, the EU, I think the US, the last I checked even. And this kind of puts on Israel heightened obligations to the civilian population to see to their welfare. So it's not by any means a sort of minimal look at obligations. It's a more of a maximalist that they must do all that they can within the limits that are present to see to the welfare of the population. Parallel to this, Israel also has obligations as a party to the hostilities, and that is, in the simplest terms, to what's referred to as to allow and facilitate entry of humanitarian convoys and to not interfere in the operations of humanitarians trying to deliver assistance. So Israel has formally adopted that is its role. In a petition that Gisha brought together with partner organizations, the state said throughout the legal proceedings, we accept our position as a party to the hostilities, not as an occupying power. And so this very minimal duty to at least allow and facilitate humanitarian assistance. But I think from what we can judge and see for ourselves throughout this nearly 2 years, that minimal obligation hasn't even been fulfilled. And certainly in the 2.5 months of a total blockade, I would say, completely in contravention to its obligations. But I do think that, the position of Israel as an occupying power, to me, is more obvious than ever. Israel is fully controlling everything that enters and exits the Gaza Strip, everyone who can enter and exit the sky, the sea. And of course, the operation also, it's deciding which organizations can operate inside of the territory. It's controlling, areas of land inside of Gaza, about 86% of the territory of the Strip, which is twice the size of Washington, D.C. So I don't know, for the people who are familiar with D.C., it's very small. It's already small, and 86% of it has been declared by Israel to either be completely off limits, a no-go zone, or under active displacement orders. So they're also controlling land inside of the Strip and access within the Strip. So I think that the assessment that Israel is an occupying power is really hard to deny at this point. It's not just our interpretation.
So the legal issues are one thing. Then, of course, there's the question of policy and what would be an alternative policy, right? The policy from day one, as you said, there were ministers very clearly saying that, we're going to cut off everything. Then there were actual times when everything was in fact cut off, and the policy of limits and trying to minimize the amount of supply that's getting in and to try to control where it's all going. That's been the policy thus far. There's an alternative strategy, which would be to flood the zone, right? I mean, and that's something that a lot of analysts have been talking about, that wouldn't there be an advantage from a policy point of view if one were to, in fact, just open up the gates, open them wide, let in as much as possible. So to the point that there was just even too much. What would be your perspective on that sort of a policy shift and why it isn't more in discussion in Israel? What would the benefits be of doing that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that has not really been entertained by Israeli officials, because they really have never let go of this concept of deprivation as a strategy. And I think that, on the contrary, what we saw just recently with the total blockade was, them finally answering to this call to kind of hit them harder and to, limit what is going in even more. And that has really been a sort of prominent call by the far right and people who don't see, not more morality or international law as a kind of compass, right? There really are no limits on that kind of vision of the world, that it's okay to starve a population of 2 million people. So I think that really has never changed as a kind of mode of operation. But I agree that certainly that, if aid and goods had been going in from the very beginning, then you wouldn't have seen, the incredible rise in prices and this kind of black market economy, the interest of armed gangs to steal the aid and resell it on the local market. I mean, the prices are ridiculous. So certainly I do think that would have taken out the kind of financial gains that were made by, whoever was making them.
Right. That's always been our position at J Street, is that we couldn't quite grasp why it both made sense in terms of eliminating the black market, eliminating the incentive to steal aid, but it also in terms of Israel's reputation strategically around the world, to be seen as a country that was trying to do all that it could and more, would seem to be in the Israeli national interest, as opposed to be seen as a country that is in the deprivation mode that you're talking about. I also just want to note, in terms of some of the questions and comments as always in a webinar on these things, there's some back and forth going on. I just want to be really clear that the conditions in which the hostages are being held are also, of course, contrary to international law, are war crimes, are inhumane, are immoral. And J Street is 100% dedicated, and I know you are as well, to ensuring that every hostage is brought home as quickly as possible. And our view is that that is best achieved through a diplomatic arrangement to be reached as quickly as possible to end the war, bring the hostages home, and surge aid into Gaza. So I just want to make sure that that is very clear. A final question to you before we switch over. We're going to have Tony Aguilar joining us very shortly, who has been till recently was working with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is what GHF stands for, by the way. I know there's some question about what acronyms we use. So GHF. But the question that I think a lot of people have is, within Israeli society, the discussion of what is happening in Gaza has been relatively limited. I mean, I'm being polite. There's been practically no discussion. There has been a little bit of awareness in the last couple of weeks, the last few weeks, about starvation, famine, the conditions in Gaza. From Gisha's perspective, is there more that could be done by Israeli advocacy groups to bring the situation of the people, as distinct from the situation of Hamas, to the attention of the people of Israel? Is there a role for Israeli NGOs in doing more to publicize what's really going on?
Yeah. Certainly, and I think, we and others, of course, have been trying to do this from the very beginning, including trying to get more information about what's happening into Israeli media. And really, there has been a self-censorship that is wall to wall for almost this entire time. You really simply did not see any images of Gaza other than kind of these desolate landscapes of destruction, or embeds with Israeli soldiers. You didn't see faces of people. You certainly didn't hear their voice. And that is really slowly starting to change. But I would caution against some of the optimism that's out there about change in public perception in Israel. I think that, despite some small breakthroughs, we're still seeing polls showing overwhelming support for Israeli policy in Gaza, or indifference to suffering. And I think that the most that we can sort of see or acknowledge is that people acknowledge that they're suffering, but they're still a far way from seeing Israeli culpability for this. And so that has been our challenge, is to really sort of expose the inner workings of these policies. And I do think that Israel is working overtime, especially now, after it was very open about its strategy of depriving and not allowing aid in, and doing all of these things, to suddenly backtrack and say, oh, it's not our fault, it's Hamas, it's the UN, it's all of these other actors. It's not taking responsibility for what it has done, and the catastrophe that I think it has created in the Strip. And that certainly does not reduce the culpability of Hamas for what it has done. And certainly I agree with you 100%, the need to release the hostages without conditions. But still, I as an Israeli, it's important to me that Israel take responsibility for its part in this.
Well, one final question before we let you go and bring Tony in here. There's a lot of people who are going to watch this, and a lot of people in J Street who just want to be personally helpful, who want to do something. And so I'm curious if you have any recommendations for folks on, if they do want, let's say somebody mentioned their synagogue wants to do something around the high holidays to provide assistance to people in Gaza, or if people individually want to send something and make a contribution, where can people know that the dollars and contributions that they send are actually going to be best really used to help the people of Gaza?
Yeah. Look, I think a number of organizations are operating in the Strip, and I think all of them are doing incredible work. You know what those organizations are. I'm not going to name them by name, but anyone that you hear about operating, for the most part, I can vouch for them that they're doing important work. Including American organizations. I do think that, Gisha and organizations like us operating in Israel could also use your support. I do think that there's a tendency to want to kind of send in direct aid, but I also really believe in the importance of advocacy. And, J Street, of course, is doing that work from inside the US, and our organizations are doing it here on the ground in Israel. So there's a lot of us in this community, and we definitely need your support as well.
Well, I just want to say a personal thank you and an organizational thank you to Tanya and to Gisha. That's Gisha at gisha.org, and definitely an organization that we depend on. And I know that policymakers and political leaders in Washington really depend on your information and your expertise to support the work that is done here. So thank you very, very much for all that you do. And we will continue to be partners and to be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, we're going to say goodbye to Tanya Harry, and we're going to say hello to Lieutenant Colonel retired Tony Aguilar, who's a former Green Beret, Purple Heart recipient. He has served as a contractor for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and has since leaving employment there, and we'll discuss that. He is now essentially blowing the whistle on what has been happening there with the operations of the GHF in Gaza. And it has been something, I know, Tony, that has subjected you to a lot of personal attack, and you've certainly been out there publicly. And I just want to salute your bravery, not only in your service to the country in a formal manner, but your service to, as you've said, American values and really to the human interest by what you have done stepping forward. Could you tell folks a little bit about you, about your background, and what drew you to work in the first place for the efforts in Gaza?
Oh, well, to the previous speaker, I just wanted to say just thank you for everything that you described and what you laid out. I am in complete agreement, and the way you explained everything in terms of the humanitarian assistance, the humanitarian aid, the need for accountability, that's really kind of the message that I am also trying to convey through a different optic, through a different lens. But it's a very important message. I also too would like to see a diplomatic end to this, the release of hostages without conditions. I feel that from my experience in war, that we're at a point now, a precipice, that this must end diplomatically, that to end this militarily will not succeed. And it will only be bad for Israel as a nation state. It'll be bad for our allies. It'll be bad for the world. And it's time to realize that. As far as my background, I retired in March, 25 years of service. I did not have an intent to become a private contractor or an independent contractor or work in the industry. My intent was to be a retired, stay-at-home dad, husband, and make up for, 25 years of not being home, to focus on the family. And I got a call in May from UG Solutions, which is a subcontractor under the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, to provide armed security for the distribution of humanitarian aid in what was conveyed to me to be the humanitarian assistance mechanism to replace that of the United Nations. And that's what I thought going in, that this mechanism was built and designed to replace that of the United Nations mechanism. Politically, in terms of what that meant overall, was really outside of my scope of responsibility. I felt that I could help. I felt that feeding the population, a starving population, an oppressed population, was something that didn't really have political lines. It's not red, it's not blue, it's not left, it's not right, it's not up, it's not down. It's humanity. And I wanted to be a part of that. I quickly learned within the first days, and then confirmed through the weeks that I was there. Every day from the 24th of May, I arrived into Israel on the 19th of May, and by the 24th of May was in Gaza and spent every day in Gaza until the 13th of June when I resigned and departed. And what I would say is that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, not naively or ignorantly, but deliberately and with full complicity, is a tool and mechanism of this starvation, this using food as a weapon, using food as a means of leverage and power, using starvation as a means of negotiation. When I first learned of Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I didn't know much about them. And for anybody that has been looking into them, about 3 days ago, they finally created a website. They did not have one. I've been calling them out on that for a while. They have one now, so there's a little bit more transparency, or at least the facade of transparency. But it is absolutely, without a doubt, that food, aid, water, displacement, punishment of the population is absolutely being used as a tool of leverage and negotiation. That it's gotten to a point to where it's so bad that now we think that we've risen to a level of okay that we're doing airdrops. Airdrops achieve nothing. They're a gesture. They're a platitude. They do not achieve anything in terms of bringing food into the enclave. Neither does the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And the previous speaker brought up such a great point that I think is just so important for everyone to understand, is that when there was continuous aid going into the enclave daily, it was important to keep track of the number of trucks, because that was the measure of performance in terms of how much aid we were bringing into the enclave on a sustained basis. Imagine, if you will, a grocery store that every Tuesday got its delivery to restock its shelves. And then for months that stopped. Well, you can't then go back to the same model of distribution to that grocery store to what it once was. You have a deficit to then fill. And every day that goes by, that deficit that increases is resulting in the death of civilians. And again, is there justification for the war based on the atrocities of what was done on October 7th and before, quite frankly? Absolutely. But to then punish a population in whole through the deprivation of food and water and human dignity, that is not how democracies and world powers and great nations such as Israel and the United States engage in the world. That is not how we do things. And some people might say, well, it's war, there are no rules. And to that I say, shame on you. To that I say, you are wrong, and I will disagree with you on that until the day that I die. Because for 25 years in the Army, in the United States Army, deployed in 4 different wars, 12 combat deployments, a Purple Heart and Valor Awards for fighting in war, there are rules. Those rules are what maintain our dignity and our humanity, not as just a world society, but as nations. And not just because it's something nice to do, because human dignity is that is why we have the Geneva Conventions. And what I would like to remind everybody, or notify everybody of, if you don't know already, is that within the structure of international humanitarian law, the protocols of the Geneva Convention, which were updated in 1977 with the second protocols of the 4th ratification, specifically outline that you cannot, you will not, you shall not, it is prohibited to use food, water, aid sites, things that civilians need, the population, to destroy, control, or manipulate those sites or those areas or those services for the purpose of waging war against the enemy. It is forbidden. We cannot do it. We should not do it. There's a reason why that exists. So from my experience, there's plenty of times that I spoke out there in terms of the mechanics of the sites. And what I think is really more important to convey, and what I think is really important to understand, is that food, water, homes, places to live, churches, schools, hospitals, clinics are being destroyed and used as a tool of leverage. And it is not accidental. It is deliberate. If you look at the narrative of, at once there was pure ownership of this process, and then when the world turned and said, whoa, that looks pretty bad. Now there's the backpedaling of, oh, no, we're not doing that. But once you've committed to that path, there's no going back. The only way out of that path is accountability and to stop. And right now is the point to stop, accept accountability, be honest with ourselves. The discussion should now no longer be if there's starvation in Gaza, if there is total annihilation of Gaza. Let's accept that as a fact. Let's accept that as the reality. And the discussion should now move on as a world society of allied nations as to what we're going to do about it. Not what it is. I think the world can now see what it is. For anybody that didn't think that Gaza, and again, I didn't just see Gaza from above in an aircraft. I didn't see it from outside the gate from afar. I didn't see it on a TV or in a newspaper. I was there. The smell of death, the looking at people that are dying of starvation, seeing children that have been killed or died. It's not some conspiracy. It's not some propaganda hoax that's being this cloak and dagger of what it is real. It is absolutely real. And what I would ask is that if you can't take it from the surgeons and the UN workers and the people that have been there for a lot longer than me that have been saying it, and that my voice is now adding to that, it is real. And we are complicit. And it needs to end. And again, I believe that Israel is a great nation. I believe the United States is a great nation. I believe that we as leaders in the world are great nations. And great nations don't do this. Great nations take accountability and don't do this. It needs to end. The war needs to end with a diplomatic solution, because if Israel thinks that the occupation or the further annihilation of the territory is going to lead some kind of lasting settlement, it will not. And it will bring Israel into a state of war that it will not survive. Israel will not survive this war if it continues down this path. It will not survive diplomatically. It will not survive as a military. It will not survive as a nation state, because this war can drag it into a position to where Israel could become a pariah state, a rogue nation, and nobody wants that.
Well, Tony, I just want to say thank you. I've watched a few of your clips on PBS and talking with Senator Chris Van Hollen and a few other of your appearances. And, I've sensed the deep, deep personal emotion that you bring to this. And it clearly taps into, and you've talked about this, what your values are as a human being, but as an American, as somebody who has served this country. And I think I just want to add from the J Street perspective, that we are bringing into this conversation a sense of Jewish values. What is our morality as a people? The state of Israel is the national homeland of the Jewish people. And in our view, the state of the Jewish people has to uphold the highest of the values of the Jewish people. And what is happening for us is not in accord with our values. And the silence of leaders in our community about what is happening, to our mind, we have said very clearly that silence is complicity. And so I just want to thank you on behalf of the community that we represent for the passion and the values that you are bringing to this. And I wanted to just give you a chance to talk a little bit about, specifically those values and what, you were there for a few weeks and it just was so overwhelming that you just had to leave and speak out about it. And what motivates you to do that at a personal level? I mean, how did you get to that point given what you have done and given where you've been in your career and what you've seen, that this period of time brought you to feel so passionately the need to speak out?
When I first got into Gaza, again, believing in the mission, believing in the purpose in what we were attempting to achieve, initial indications were that maybe this is just ignorance and naivete, and that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation got involved in something that's a lot more. They bit off more than they can chew, and things will progress towards achieving what the stated goal is of delivering humanitarian assistance, not just dried food goods, but humanitarian assistance at scale into the enclave. The more and more I started to realize that that is not the objective, that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has no intent to do that. They have no intent to alleviate the starvation and the precipice of famine. They have no intent to achieve conditions that are then conducive to a diplomatic end. They are deliberate in their position and what they are doing, in being an appendage to bring further suffering to the population of Gaza. And it is so clear. It is so evident. And when it became clear and it became evident to me, and again, staying as long as I did, I wanted to quit every day, not because of the overwhelming stress of war. I've been there. I've done it. I was I wouldn't say I was inoculated to it, but it wasn't something that I wasn't.
25 years, 25 years of service.
4 wars, I've been a lot of places, and it wasn't something in that sense. It was the sense that I was a part of I was a part of an organization that's part of the problem. And unless someone speaks out that's there, that saw it, that witnessed it, that understands the nature of this, the nuance level and the nature of what this really is, no one's going to know, and two, no one's ever going to believe it. I mean, it's just it appalls me that in one statement or in one appearance of GHF leadership, they can say how things are great, we're doing awesome, but then in the next piece they say, oh well, it's not our fault that it's failing, we need help. It's like, well, this doublespeak, this cloak and dagger, and using taxpayers' dollars, Israeli money and U.S. money, taxpayers, and using that in this is disingenuous, and in my opinion, it's unethical, and I would go to the length of saying that it's criminal, and it needs to be addressed. And that's why I left, not because I quote unquote necessarily couldn't take it anymore. I wouldn't take it anymore, and I realized that speaking out against this is the only way.
Well, let me ask you to comment a little bit about the violence that I know many of us are just so deeply distraught about reading about. I mean, you witnessed firsthand the violence around these distribution centers, and we're reading that it might be IDF soldiers that are firing. It might be the contractors themselves that are affiliated with GHF. It might be criminal gangs. It might be Hamas. I mean, there's just a whole range of armed actors in this area. The bottom line is that it does appear that hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent people have been killed and injured in the in and out from these sites. What was your personal experience during the time that you were there about the source of the violence? And what, I've seen some footage, but others haven't. If you could describe what it is that you saw.
So the lack of leadership and the lack of leadership on the ground, and clear rules of engagement and clear rules of escalation of force, things that are required in situations such as this, were never dictated and never present and never laid out. So you have this situation of almost like a Lord of the Flies type of situation where no one's in charge. And in a situation like this, you need someone in charge. So is it true that in the environment that there are armed actors, many, the IDF, UG Solutions, Hamas, militias, gangs, bandits? Sure, absolutely. I've never said different. Tony Aguilar, in all the time that I was there, not once ever saw an armed Palestinian. Not once near or on or at the sites saw anyone returning fire to a site, being threatening or bringing violence to a site, or in any way ever appeared to be threatening in any way whatsoever. And I was at all 4 sites. I didn't just do one, I went to all 4. And I went to all 4 sometimes I was at different sites multiple times, multiple days. A lot of time on the sites, never saw it once. I didn't just sit in the control room in Karim Shalom. I didn't just sit in a truck. I was there on the ground, face to face with it. Never experienced that. Not to say that it's not there. I never saw it. The only times that I ever saw shooting that led to injury and death was either by UG Solutions contractors in the unnecessary, overwhelming use of force, and by the IDF in shooting in what they would describe as warning shots or communication by gunfire. And to be honest, I don't know what I would do in terms of the situation that they're in, because it is an untenable, unrealistic dilemma. What I would do, the GHF leadership should be on the line. The sites should have never been built where they are. You don't put secure distribution sites to deliver humanitarian aid to service an unarmed civilian population with civil service in the middle of an active combat zone in the areas that they're built. There were so many different options on where these sites could have been built, which is why it became apparent to me that this is intentional. This was done intentionally. The design of the sites, where the sites are, how the sites operate. It's not an accident. It's not the fog and friction of war. It is deliberate. So
just to clarify, the sites, for people who don't know the geography well, the sites are built within the areas of the Gaza Strip that are under the military control of the IDF. So you have to cross a security checkpoint in order to get into the area where the sites have been built.
To get into sites 1, 2, and 3, you have to. You cannot not do it. You have to cross into and then cross south of the Marag corridor, which then takes you into the operational engagement area, the combat zone of Operation Gideon's Chariots, which has been going on since March. It recently ended. It culminated about a week ago before the talk came of the total occupation. So to build the sites where they are was deliberate, it was preventable, and it was done intentionally. It was done on purpose. That's what gets me to the point to where it's undeniable that this isn't deliberate. It's not an accident. You don't, I mean, under the UN, there were 400 sites. Some
Right.
of those sites with food kitchens and operations set up could have been reutilized in the areas that they're in. No, GHF built their own in areas that are completely unserviceable to the Palestinians. They have to travel great distance, and when they get there, they have to cross into a militarized zone. Imagine if during the invasion of Iraq in Baghdad, when people fled to the north from Baghdad during the invasion, if during the invasion we put an indisplaced persons refugee corridor right through the middle of Baghdad. It'd be preposterous. That's what this is. The sites should have been built. So the situation that the Israelis, the IDF, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, UGS Solutions contractors find themselves in shouldn't even be a situation. It's regardless of what's happening and how it's being done, which is also wrong. We should never have been in this situation. It was preventable. In fact, not only was it preventable, we shouldn't have done it this way.
And again, I think folks probably are just trying to imagine this in their mind. I just want to paint this picture that you've got a population of 2 million people that have been squeezed into 3 basic areas of the Gaza Strip that amount to somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% of the available land. The other 85% or so is under Israeli control. And then you've got 4 distribution sites serving 2 million people. So tens of thousands of usually more able-bodied younger men are being sent by their families to descend on these 4 sites at the hours when there's suddenly a notice on WhatsApp or whatever that it's going to be open. There's a scramble, a mad dash, because people are absolutely starving, and it's a sort of survival of the fittest, Lord of the Flies type of situation. Yes. And as I understand it, whatever the amounts of boxes are that are there for distribution, they're gone in like 7 to 11 minutes.
That is correct.
It's like, if you had a visual overhead of thousands of people descending and running and racing and grabbing, and it's all gone in 7 to 11
Imagine if you had the entire population of the New York City Marathon lined up at the starting line, and instead of starting in phase hour or 30-minute increments of moving, the whole thing started at one time. One shotgun start, the whole group of tens of thousands, and they were all going into a Walmart.
Right, and desperate and hungry to feed their family.
Desperate, hungry, and fighting for survival. So most of which are in varying states of starvation.
And so you're bound to get a sense of violence and fear there. And you
absolutely
have, a handful of armed people faced with this. It's a formula.
I would say that the violence, the chaos, the absolute deprivation of human dignity is baked into the process. It's deliberate. It's baked into how this process was designed. And I think that GHF leadership should be accountable.
Tony, we have about 5 minutes left in the conversation, and I do think it's important to flag, and I apologize for raising this, but I think it's important for you to address it and, give folks your response. The GHF, in response to your allegations, has made the claim back that as many employers do when faced with a whistleblower coming out and revealing what they've seen, they say that you are a disgruntled employee who was dismissed for non-performance, and that the charges you're now making are part of a retaliatory attack on them for having let you go. So I just want to give you a chance to address the charges that have been made against you.
You know who says the same thing about people that leave the country and tell other people about the atrocities that are happening? Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. So yeah, GHF is amongst that population. It is war criminal tyranny 101. Every person that came out before me anonymously, that is the exact same narrative that the GHF put out immediately. Disgruntled employee that we fired, disgruntled employee that we fired, disgruntled employee that we fired. Now that I came out on the record, they can put all that on me. And that's fine, because there are people behind me that are coming with the truth. I know this. The day of reckoning on the truth of what's going on by not just me, but others is coming. And when they come and that truth comes out, they've already put all the, bad employee, this and that on me. Fine. Me being a bad employee doesn't change the nature of what's happening. Okay. I resigned. But if GHF wants to say they terminated me and I was the worst employee ever, okay, fine. You hired me. I was there. The videos and the pictures speak for themselves. So go ahead and call me whatever you want. I don't care. In fact, the amount that they push back and yet choose to attack me instead of addressing one single substantial salient point, not even one, and they choose to use their energy on attacking me, that should be a clear indication to everyone. And some of the things that they accuse me of and some of the things they say are laughable, that I'm being funded by Hamas. I will tell everybody, I have no PR support. I have no PR firm. I have no lawyers. I have no social media crew. I have no media relations team. I have no team at all. It's me. It's me and the truth. That's it. I have nothing. I mean, up until yesterday, I didn't even have a social media account that I stood up so I could do a X-hosted Twitter podcast thing, whatever you call it. And then I got rid of the account because I don't have social media. So I'm not out here for clicks, likes, and support. I'm out here for the truth. And if you believe the truth, do something about it. If you don't believe it, fine. I mean, I can't convince you otherwise, but I would ask, if you haven't been to Gaza and you're running your mouth as to what I have seen, I think that's pretty disingenuous.
One of the things I'll just add into the mix for folks is J Street works very closely with an organization called Breaking the Silence in Israel, which is an organization of folks who have served in the IDF. And then when they come out of the IDF, they tell their stories about what it was that they did. And we've focused a lot of our work on the West Bank and particularly around the occupation of the city of Hebron. But I know that Breaking the Silence is collecting testimonies now of soldiers coming out of Gaza. And it has not yet been published, and it's going to take a little bit of time, but I do know that there are hundreds and hundreds of IDF soldiers that are telling their stories about what it is that they are seeing from the IDF side of this equation. I mean, you're telling
yes. And so when you take my perspective that has come through in video, pictures, and eyewitness and other testimony, I'm not the only contractor that's come out. There are about a dozen more that are already in the process where more will come out soon. These take time.
Right.
And when it does, and you have the story from the IDF, and you have the story from inside the sites from the contractors, and you have the story from the Palestinians that have been eating the hardship of this, and that all comes together, that's called the truth. And GHF cannot hide from it.
And I will also say, one of the things that is an indicator of the trauma of all of this in the service of the people who were there is the level of suicide of IDF soldiers, the level of PTSD that is being reported, and a lot of the issues mental health wise are from what the units that people served in were doing.
It is hard to live with oneself,
right,
regardless if it was your fault or you did it intentionally or didn't do it intentionally or just witnessed it. It is heart-wrenching. It rips your heart out.
And
I mean, it's still to see women and children that are starving or that are blown to pieces or shot and dead. I mean, it doesn't matter if seeing that and being surrounded by that rips your heart out. And for those that think that it's something you can ignore, and I know the GHF UG Solutions contractors, when they come home and they're no longer in this vacuum, in this vacuum chamber, and they have to face their wives and their children and look at themselves in the mirror, more will come out. I am confident of it. That's why the insults and the smearing doesn't bother me at all, because the day of truth is coming. And I will be on the right side of history. And I ask anyone who wants to be on the right side of history, let's join hands and let's fix this.
Well, thank you very much to Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar and Tony, if I may. We are just very, very grateful for your service to our country and for your service to our values and the truth in coming out and saying all this. I want to urge folks to join J Street's call on the Jewish communal leadership to speak out more for our morals. We're going to put a link into the chat for the Substack that I write and Elon Goldenberg writes, where we've taken on a lot of these moral issues related to Gaza. Please subscribe to that, join J Street, support our petitions, help us in pressuring members of Congress and senators. I know Chris Van Hollen gave a platform to Tony for his testimony, and we're grateful for the leadership of a number of folks in the Senate and the House and trying to bring these
I'll be
issues.
back up in DC in early September, sir. Doing similar to the same, the House and the Senate are on recess, but I'll be
Right.
back up in the first week of September, and I think we're really gonna continue to gain traction on seeing results.
Exactly, and I think we're helping you set up some of those meetings, and
Yes.
we're very
Yes.
pleased to work together
Yes.
with you.
I'm honored. It is an honor.
Thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you in person when you're up here, and thank everybody who's been with us. And we will be posting this on our various social media outlets. Even if Tony can't access those, we will be posting them.
Someone send me a link.
Exactly.
My mom will watch it and send it to me. She's
There you go.
she's on social media.
All right, all the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Bye-bye.